We're continuing our journey through the legacy of Touchstone Pictures today, a studio that will easily ring nostalgia bells for those of you who loved watching movies back during the 80s and 90s. In this video, I'll be diving into all the behind-the-scenes business and on-the-screen cinema Touchstone would deliver in 1987. This would be the first full year under their production plans. They would drop 9 movies from January to December. Of those movies, a few would be regarded as classics and in some cases, iconic films from the 80s. So let's step back into 1987 and see what was happening at the Touchstone offices over in Hollywood. Hey, what's up out there, guys? I hope you're all having a fantastic day in your worlds. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome to Movies Never Say Die. I'm Anthony DeJoya, and this is your one-stop shop for retro movie content. And today, we're moving along with this studio series covering Touchstone Pictures. If you missed it, I did do a full video covering Touchstone's beginnings and their early operations from 84 to 86. I think it came out to be a solid little video loaded with a lot of information in a short time, so definitely check that thing out if you're interested. Regardless, here's a quick breakdown of Touchstone Pictures up to 1987 to bring everybody up to speed. It all started when Disney wanted to make movies for adults, but knew the Disney name was long since tainted as being for kids, so they created the banner of Touchstone Films to separate themselves from the product. Things were naturally a bit rocky out of the gate with a couple of hits, but mostly misses, and Disney's stock continued to flounder. In 1984, Michael Eisner would come in as the new CEO of Disney, and after getting settled in for a few months, Eisner and his team would shift their focus over to Touchstone Films. 1985 was, of course, already locked in with projects from prior management, and it was not a stellar year at the box office, but Eisner and company were working behind the scenes, and they would come out of the gate hot in 1986, a year where things would really turn around for the studio, including a name change to Touchstone Pictures. So at this point, here was the basic structure of it all. The Walt Disney Company had created Touchstone Films. Disney would also partner with an investment firm to create Silver Screen Partners 2. Now, the number after is essentially the limited partnership number, or the loan number, basically. Silver Screen Partners refers to limited partnerships between the studio and essentially a bunch of ultra-rich people who invest money to produce films. Now, HBO at the time, who was still working off their original Silver Screen Partners deal from '83, was expecting another collaboration with a third limited partnership deal, but sadly HBO was out, and Silver Screen Partners 3 would be another deal with Disney. This is where investors felt their money was the safest and most assured for a hefty ROI. So in January of '87, $300 million would be raised by Silver Screen Partners 3 for film financing between Disney Pictures and Touchstone Projects, which at the time was the largest venture ever for a limited partnership by E.F. Hutton, the investment firm that brokered the deal between both sides and essentially did all the paperwork for it. Touchstone Pictures would be financed by Silver Screen Partners. Their films would be distributed to theaters by Walt Disney Pictures. Then there was the home market side, which of course Disney already had set up. Now, it had had several name changes over the years, but Buena Vista Pictures was a film distribution division created within the Disney umbrella back in 1953, and that had been their primary means of home video and theatrical distribution since. Now, on the cable side, Disney also had inked a sizable 5-year deal with Showtime for exclusive streaming rights for all Touchstone Picture movies. As for the on-screen talent, Michael Eisner was known for hiring actors on the cheap, actors whose spotlight was fading or flickering, and those on the rise, or those in legal problems, or having a falling out from a media faux pas of some sort. Eisner joked once in an interview that he actually waited out behind the Betty Ford clinic to hire his talent, which is why, as we progress through the Touchstone filmography, you'll start to recognize a handful of regulars. So on the business side of things, all was in place: financing, production, home video, cable, means of acquiring stars, all set, ready to rock and roll. Now, on the cinema side, 1986 was a positive year as Touchstone would land 3 movies in the top 20 at the global box office, with Ruthless People, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, and The Color of Money all killing it. Not to forget, The Color of Money was officially an awards film when Newman would take home Best Actor at the Academy Awards, so the Touchstone banner had built its foundations, they had built some cachet, and in 1987, Disney, through Touchstone Pictures, would begin their climb to the top of the box office charts.
Right here, right now, both of us, kind of, taking turns.
Touchstone would get right to work in January when they would release the female buddy comedy adventure Outrageous Fortune in January. This movie starred Bette Midler and Shelley Long as actresses who were polar opposites, except for the fact they shared one thing in common, that being the same lover who goes missing mysteriously, which causes these two women to join up on a cross-country adventure to search for him. Bette Midler had inked a 6-film deal with Touchstone Pictures, and this was her third. Down and Out in Beverly Hills and Ruthless People in '86 were critical and financial hits, with Midler being praised for her performances. Touchstone hoped they would get the same from Outrageous Fortune, and they were not disappointed. It would open number 2 at the box office with a $6.4 million opening weekend, which at the time was a record for Disney. Critics, though, were mixed, but audiences loved Midler and Long together. Outrageous Fortune would spend 6 weeks in the top 5 and would tally up $53 million globally. The budget at $20 to $25 million was slightly higher due to the expensive production and the stunt sequences, but the film was a financial success and another commercial hit for Touchstone. I enjoy this movie for the comedy that it delivers and the performances from Long and Midler. I didn't watch it a ton back in the day, but when rewatching for this video, it really just, I enjoyed the charisma from the two leads and just the fun adventure that this movie delivered.
I mean, can you figure it out? A guy bangs into my car, thinks I did him in, tries to get even with me by stealing my wife. You two fall in love.
This was that guy?
Not even 2 months later, in March, Touchstone would drop another movie into theaters with Barry Levinson's Tin Men, a small time period dramedy about two rival aluminum siding salesmen played by Danny DeVito and Richard Dreyfuss in 1963 Baltimore, who go to war with one another when they are involved in a minor car accident where each claims the other is responsible. DeVito had done well with Ruthless People, and Dreyfuss scored a winner with Down and Out, so Touchstone assumed putting these two talented actors together would lead to success, and while admittedly not the success of their first Touchstone outings, DeVito and Dreyfuss had a critical winner together with Tin Men. This was certainly a niche film about a couple of salesmen from the 60s battling it out. This movie would get a soft opening on March 6th, playing on just 9 screens to pull in $187,000 to take the 13th spot, but it would get a wider release the following week and pull in $4 million to climb up to the number 4 spot, and Tin Men would be a top 5 film at the box office for a solid month to pull in a respectable $25.4 million on just an $11 million budget. This movie was well received by audiences. Critics enjoyed it as well. It was just never a film that was going to strike the masses like their other outings with Touchstone Pictures. I actually watched this movie in its entirety for this video for the first time, and I think it's a very well acted and extremely well written, grounded comedy with spots of sincere drama, and I think it's a very entertaining movie that holds up great after all these years. Off screen at this time, Disney was still working on deals to spread the Touchstone movies across the globe, and in May of '87, Disney would sign an international distribution deal. Warner Brothers Inc. would actually dissolve a 16-year-long distribution deal with Columbia Pictures and take over international releasing for Disney and Touchstone, while Disney would continue to distribute on the domestic side. Around this same time, Disney CEO Michael Eisner and executive Jeffrey Katzenberg were attending the Indianapolis 500, and during the race, there was a parade of some sorts, and both men were surprised to see this little comedian playing a goofy handyman named Ernest getting a much larger reaction from the crowd than Mickey Mouse, and suddenly, Eisner and Katzenberg had an idea. They promptly scheduled a meeting with John Cherry and Coke Sam's, creators of the Ernest character, and funny man Jim Varney, who played the role, and told them they wanted to make a movie. Cherry and Sam's were naturally all in. I mean, why wouldn't they be? Disney was out of the blue offering to give you millions of dollars to make a movie. Varney, on the other hand, feared of being typecast in the character, and he was reluctant but agreed. He even went on a rather heavy bender before filming, but it was stated that he was a complete pro once the production started.
Is that your smallest needle? I did it!
Just a little bird, baby.
Ernest Goes to Camp would splash into theaters on Memorial Weekend, a little story about a summer camp handyman with big dreams of being a guidance counselor who has to earn his stripes dealing with a group of delinquents while also fending off a shady corporation wanting to close the camp would take all the kids by storm that summer. This movie would be directed by Cherry and Sams, and alongside Jim Varney would star Victoria Racimo, 80s staple Lyle Alzado, and John Vernon. I'll be honest, I was never a huge Ernest fan. I mean, I thought he was funny. I felt like I watched him a ton as a kid, but his antics were something that I could either take or leave growing up. This movie never really grabbed me either. The drastic tonal differences between the juvenile humor and the sappy, sentimental parts were just a bit too wide for me. Even as a kid, I just really never liked the group of younger characters in this movie, so of course it just didn't get the repeat that Ernest Saves Christmas would. Audiences, however, ate this movie up. Now, it opened the same weekend as Beverly Hills Cop 2, which raked in $33 million, so Ernest wasn't catching Axel Foley, but he would take the number 2 spot with a solid $6.2 million opening. Ernest Goes to Camp would only have a 5-week theatrical run, but it would be long enough for the movie to pull in $23.5 million on a measly $3.5 million budget, and just like that, Touchstone Pictures would have a franchise with Ernest, who would return for 4 more theatrical releases and another 4 on the direct-to-video market. So Touchstone Pictures scored a financial hit with Ernest Goes to Camp being made on a micro budget, but Touchstone wasn't just resting on this little movie for their summer slate and would drop their next film into theaters in just 5 weeks. Now, for Touchstone's next movie, we need to step back into late 1986 and head across town over to Paramount Pictures. Writer David Simpkins had been shopping a script around town that was a cross between Ferris Bueller's Day Off and After Hours, a high-energy, trendy teen adventure comedy. At the time, Simpkins was working for New World Pictures, who were not interested. Paramount Pictures, on the other hand, was very interested. The only caveat was they insisted that Molly Ringwald be the star. In the minds of Paramount execs, Ringwald was their Matthew Broderick for this role, but Ringwald didn't want to do the movie. Disney and Touchstone, however, were sitting on their massive Silver Screen Partners 3 fund, so they said, come on over and make your movie.
Now, boys, I swear, if you give me any grief over the next 60 minutes, I swear to God, I'll kill you. Dead. Murdered. Stabbed.
Adventures in Babysitting would center on, of course, a babysitter who brings the kids that she's looking after into the big city to help a friend out, and of course, one comical mishap after the other will occur, resulting in a night none of them would ever forget. This would be the directorial debut of Chris Columbus, and it would also be the breakout performance for Elizabeth Shue, with Maya Bruton, Keith Coogan, Anthony Rapp, and Penelope Ann Miller supporting them to round out a great cast. Adventures in Babysitting would be the first PG-13 film released by Touchstone Pictures, and while it has gone on to be a bit of an 80s classic today, it wasn't the critical success nor the financial hit the studio was hoping for. Critics were lukewarm on it, with reviews saying there wasn't much below the surface of all the teen antics, and it would open on July 3rd just to take the number 9 spot with a $2.9 million weekend. Audiences, though, loved it. Word of mouth spread, and Adventures in Babysitting would actually see a 45% bump the following weekend to take $4.2 million home, and then when all was said and done, this movie would pull in a respectable $34.4 million on just a $7 million budget. So while not being the $50 to $60 million hit Touchstone may have hoped for, it was a financial success, and I have no doubt that this movie killed it on home video because that's where I watched it a dozen or so times. I've always loved this movie. I've watched it countless times over the years. I think the comedy works. I think the characters work. The story keeps a swift pace, and it does all the genre tropes well. Now, just a month later, with Adventures in Babysitting still holding into the charts at the box office, Touchstone would drop another summer movie, one that would ultimately replicate the massive success of their prior summer with Ruthless People.
Long brown hair, brown eyes. 313 pounds. 313 pounds. Let me see that. I would imagine that's fully clothed.
Stakeout is a crime comedy directed by John Badham, centered on a couple of detectives who are assigned to watch an escaped convict's ex-girlfriend, but the case, of course, gets complicated when one of the detectives falls for her. Richard Dreyfuss was back again with Touchstone, and he would be paired this time with Emilio Estevez and Madeline Stowe in her first mainstream performance. Stakeout would drop into theaters on August 5th to take the number 2 spot with a strong $5.1 million weekend, but this movie is a classic example of the power that longevity can have for a well-received movie. Stakeout was critically liked and audiences loved it as well. With strong word of mouth spreading, it would climb to the number 1 spot its second weekend with a $5.6 million take-home, and this was the era when character-driven comedies could command the summer. Stakeout would spend 5 straight weeks in the number 1 spot at the box office. This movie would be a top 10 movie for 11 straight weeks, and when all was said and done, Stakeout earned $65.7 million on just a $14.5 million budget, and I love this movie. I've watched it so many times over the years. Dreyfuss and Estevez's odd couple pairing is a blast, and the story is able to keep a quick pace. When Stakeout is being funny, it's hilarious. When the action ramp up, so does the intensity. And overall, I consider this to be one of the all-time great action comedies out there. Just 1 week after the release of Stakeout, Touchstone Pictures would drop their last movie of the summer into theaters. It was a teen romance comedy about a shy nerd who pays the it girl $1,000 to pretend to be his girlfriend for a month so that he can gain some popularity in Can't Buy Me Love, directed by Steve Rash. With Stakeout still sitting at the top of the box office charts, Can't Buy Me Love would land in the theaters on August 14th to take the number 3 spot with a $4.8 million weekend on over 1,200 screens. Critics again were lukewarm on this movie, claiming that it wasted a chance at being a unique, sincere teen rom-com of its own to follow some of the popular tropes in the genre, but audiences again proved their disconnect from the critics and actually loved it. This movie would spend 6 of its first 7 weeks in the top 10. It would pull in $31.6 million on just an estimated $6.5 to $8 million budget. So despite the critical warnings, the general public ate this movie up, and it has gone on to be regarded as one of the classic teen rom-coms to come out of the 80s.
Let's go say hello.
You can't say hello. He was at your funeral.
From here, Touchstone would take a few months off before dropping their next release, a small little comedy called Hello Again, directed by Frank Perry, about a suburban housewife played by Shelley Long, who was brought back to life by her sister using a magical spell after she chokes to death. This movie would also star Corbin Burnson and Celia Ward. Hello Again would open on November 6th and land in the number 2 spot behind Fatal Attraction with a solid $5.7 million weekend. It would receive mixed reviews, but it ended up being a modest hit, showing the commercial appeal of Shelley Long. This movie would spend 3 weeks in the top 10. It would pull in a respectable $20.4 million on just a $10 million budget. I had only seen bits and pieces of this movie over the years, so I watched it for this video, and it certainly does have its spots of charm. I like Long's performance, but it's a bit too silly for its own good. It sort of feels like it's just kind of running through the comedic material. It doesn't really feel like it has much heart to it. However, it did have me chuckling on more than a few occasions, and it's certainly a throwback to the era of absurd yet simple plots that could mildly entertain you for 90 minutes. Now at this point in 1987, Touchstone Pictures had already released 7 movies, all to varying levels of financial success, but their last 2 movies of the year would be game changers and pull Touchstone Pictures into the big leagues. These 2 movies alone would just earn almost as much as all of their films the past 2 years combined. These 2 movies would be commercial and critical smash hits and would ride through the Christmas corridor, just vacuuming up ticket sales left and right. Several months earlier, a script was being shopped around Hollywood, as they always are. It was initially pitched to TriStar Pictures, but they passed on it. It was then put on the desk of executive Sid Sheinberg over at Universal Pictures, and he passed on it as well, feeling it was too soft for them. Disney, though, was interested. They loved soft films and felt it would be perfect for their Touchstone Pictures banner, and they sent it into production right away.
I build 50-story skyscrapers, I assemble cities of the future, I can certainly put together a diaper.
3 Men and a Baby would star three 80s icons, Tom Selleck, Steve Guttenberg, and Ted Danson, as free-spirited bachelors who find a baby on their doorstep and through many comedic hurdles all become fathers in their own way. And surprisingly enough, this heartfelt comedy was directed by Spock himself, Leonard Nimoy. 3 Men and a Baby would open opposite Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it would command the #1 spot with a solid $10.4 million weekend. Critics were positive on this movie. Audiences loved this movie's heartfelt charm and humor. 3 Men and a Baby would spend a staggering 15 weeks in the box office top 5 and another 5 months in theaters, pulling in a hefty $168 million in the States and another $72 million internationally for a massive haul of $240 million on just an $11 million budget. 3 Men and a Baby would be Disney and Touchstone Pictures' first $100 million live-action movie, and it would wind up being the highest-earning movie at the domestic box office in 1987, surpassing both Fatal Attraction and Beverly Hills Cop. This movie just had all the pieces. It has all the humor. It has the heart. It has just the charm of its leads. It's easily just the iconic feel-good flick of the 80s. And I just love the chemistry between Guttenberg, Danson, and Selleck. They're just cool from the beginning to the end of this movie. And to me, this is a movie that you can just kind of sit down and have a blast with no matter what you're doing. For Touchstone's last movie of the year, they had a release date of Christmas Day, and fresh off his directing of Tin Men, Barry Levinson would return to direct this war-set comedy. Now, at the time, Robin Williams was known. He had his TV resume. He had a couple of notable films such as Club Paradise and The Best of Times, but he was not yet the A-list star that he would become. He had also had some highly publicized issues with drugs and alcohol in the past, which was a worry for the board members at Disney. But as we mentioned earlier, when talking about Michael Eisner's hire on the cheap methods, Williams was a risk worth taking for him.
Boy, do I have a surprise for you.
Good morning, Vietnam!
Good Morning Vietnam would center on an irreverent, loudmouth DJ that's working the U.S. Armed Forces radio station during Vietnam, where his antics would inspire the soldiers and infuriate his superiors. Williams would headline this cast that also consisted of Forrest Whitaker and Bruno Kirby, Robert Wall, and J.T. Walsh. This movie would be a smash hit for an R-rated comedy, and it would be the breakout for Williams that would catapult him to stardom. Good Morning Vietnam would land in the theaters on December 25th in just 4 major markets. This is common for movies that are planned for a wider release the following year, but still want to be eligible for awards contention that current year. Good Morning Vietnam would play in just 4 major cities for 3 weeks, then would open wide across the country on January 15th of 1988, and during its opening wide release, Good Morning Vietnam would command the #1 spot with a $12 million weekend, finally knocking 3 Men and a Baby down to the #2 spot. This film also had incredible legs. It would spend 9 straight weeks in the #1 spot, 14 weeks in the top 10. Audiences ate this movie's poignant, heartfelt story up, and it would go on to earn $124 million on a $13 million budget. Williams was praised for his performance. He would get an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. He wouldn't win it, but he would take home the Golden Globe in that same category. And again, this is one of those movies I've watched so many times over the years, and I just couldn't love Williams' performance more. So there's no doubt Touchstone Pictures had a fantastic 1987 at the theater, with 4 movies ending up in the top 20 at the domestic box office, with 3 Men and a Baby taking the top spot. It just seemed all was going as planned. The assembly line of movie making was effective. Things would continue into 1988, where Touchstone Pictures would drop 10 movies during the calendar year, all of which will be covered in the next volume of this series. And that's all for this video, diving into the operations of business of Touchstone Pictures in 1987. I still enjoy a lot of these movies to this day. Let me know what you guys think of these movies down in the comments. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Thank you guys, as always, for watching my videos. You guys are awesome. Be on the lookout for my next one coming real soon. I hope to see you guys all there. And until then, you know the drill. Movies never say die.
This is Jack Burton in the Pork Chop Express, and I'm talking to whoever's listening out there.
Survive a war, you gotta become war.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
You trying to say Jesus Christ can't hit a curveball?